She walked into an elite private zoo. Her worn sneakers and faded coat drew sneers. The guests laughed. Must be lost, wrong gate, maybe she's the janitor. They filmed her, mocked her clothes, told her to leave. Security tried to escort her out. But she said nothing, just stood still. Then the head zookeeper ran down the hill, pale. I'm sorry, boss, he whispered, shaking the gates of Elysian Wilds didn't creak. They sighed, brushed open by motion sensors that rarely welcomed anyone who didn't arrive in a black town car. The zoo, a sanctuary of genetic rarities and billionaire indulgence, loomed beyond the wrought iron entrance. Sculpted hedges, marble plaques, and manicured silence. Entry was by invitation only, passed between royalty, oligarchs, and heirs like ancient relics. At precisely 10:04 a.m., she appeared. A woman under 30. Her coat frayed at the edges, canvas sneakers dulled with age, a navy sweater faded from too many washings. Her hair, chestnut and heavy, hung in a loose braid, its tail swinging over one shoulder like a forgotten rope. She walked slowly, as though absorbing the air itself, clean, chilled, elite. The security guard, tall, uniformed, clipboard pressed against his chest, blinked. Then squinted. Ma'am, he said, stepping forward, his voice practiced politeness dipped in suspicion. This entrance is for guests only. She nodded once, her voice soft. I know. He frowned. I'm going to have to ask you to wait outside the gates. Deliveries use the service lane. His tone shifted slightly, a command now, not a request. Two other guards glanced over. From behind her, the crunch of heels on gravel. A group had arrived, 3 women and a man, laughing behind oversized sunglasses, their winter coats, flashing luxury labels. One of the women stopped short, pulled her Dior sunglasses down her nose, and stared. Oh my God! She muttered, loudly enough for everyone to hear. Did someone's nanny take a wrong turn? Laughter. She probably thought this was a public park, said another, a man in his mid-30s, his scarf carefully knotted to reveal the Gucci label. Sweetheart, the petting zoo is downstate. The woman at the gate didn't respond. She simply stepped back, letting them pass, her expression unreadable. A teenager with a phone had started recording. We got a squatter at Elysian, he whispered to his feed. Wearing. I think that's Old Navy? Yikes. The woman remained still. An older couple walking past murmured to a nearby staffer. Security really needs to be tighter. This isn't a shelter. Behind the tinted glass of the welcome center, a receptionist glanced up, frowned, and tapped her headset. Hi, yes, we have a situation at the main gate. Someone, uncredentialed. The guards began to circle. One took out his radio. Name? The first asked again, more sharply. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Instead, she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, the edges softened from handling. She held it out without speaking. He didn't take it. Look, miss. This isn't the kind of place you just walk into. We'll call someone for you. Maybe a taxi. But then, from up the hill, near the glass aviary, a door slammed open. A man in a dark green coat jogged down the path, his face pale. A senior zookeeper. When he reached them, he looked straight at her, and blanched. Oh my God! He muttered. Then louder. I'm so sorry, boss. It's a misunderstanding. Silence. The kind that made the air feel heavy. The guards turned. The guests froze mid-mockery. A single drone hovering nearby paused, its lens zooming in. Boss? The receptionist echoed over the speaker. The zookeeper nodded, his voice shaking now. This is Miss Arden Wexley. Owner. The name landed like a cracked plate on marble, sharp, wrong, echoing in a space where it didn't belong. Owner? The man with the Gucci scarf barked a laugh, stepping forward. You're joking. The zookeeper's face drained of color. No, sir. She owns the majority share of Elysian Holdings. A beat of silence. Then, as if the truth couldn't be real, the laughter returned. Her? The Dior sunglassed woman said, voice rising like a blade. In those shoes? That sweater? Please. That's not quiet wealth. That's quiet failure. She's clearly mentally unwell, muttered another, tapping a sapphire manicured nail against her lip. Someone get her help before she walks into a lion enclosure thinking it's a food court. The teen, still recording, whispered, "This is gold," as he panned his phone down her frame. "Check this out. Billionaire cosplay, Goodwill edition." Arden Wexley said nothing. Her hands were folded, her breath even. But her cheeks, pale before, now bloomed with red, the color of exposed skin beneath a cut. A woman in a white trench leaned toward her companion. "Do you think she's a test subject or something? You know, like those shows where they film reactions?" "No," her friend replied, laughing. "She's just an embarrassment." The security guard who had turned her away now looked anywhere but at her. He was still holding the radio. No apology came. "I've seen interns dress better," said a heavy-set man in an ADP coat. "Hell, I've seen the cleaning staff at the Ritz with more polish. This is our zoo, and she just walked in like it's a farmer's market." Photos were being taken now, not just the teen, but others too. Guests with lenses long enough to film cruelty in 4K. One woman pretended to take a selfie, then turned and snapped Arden's profile. "She could have at least put on lipstick." Someone snorted. "No makeup," someone else added. "Definitely not money." And still, Arden didn't speak. She stepped aside as if she were the one in the wrong, her shoulders slightly drawn, her presence minimized. The zookeeper tried again. She's here on executive review. She doesn't need credentials." A woman with an Hermes scarf raised her phone, shaking her head. "No. This needs to go on Prive Watch. Let the world see who's pretending to own Elysian." Mockery now flowed without guilt, without resistance. They laughed not to amuse, but to erase her. Arden didn't move. Not when the laughter grew louder. Not when a man snapped a photo of her from 2 feet away. Not even when someone whispered, "Security really needs to handle these stunts better." She stood on the edge of the welcome path, one sneaker touching the white marble, the other still in the gravel, like a figure forgotten in a museum. Her hands remained calmly folded. Her braid hung still. Only her eyes moved, slow, deliberate, taking in each insult like raindrops on stone. "She's not even reacting," someone muttered. "She's probably used to being invisible," another offered. The zookeeper cleared his throat again. "Miss Wexley, if you'd like to wait in the Founders Hall." She shook her head once. "No need." Her voice, so quiet, so controlled, halted the words forming on his lips. Even the guests seemed to pause. Just for a second. But then, "Is she mute?" a woman giggled. "No wonder she dresses like she lives in a library." Arden looked toward the giraffe enclosure. Her gaze caught the glass dome of the butterfly atrium reflecting the sky. A child inside pointed at her through the pane, then turned to his mother and said, "Is that the janitor?" The mother's reply was a polite chuckle. "Sure, no, darling. That's just someone who got confused." She felt it, the pain, deep and old, like a bruise pressed too hard. But she breathed through it. She didn't cry. She didn't run. A younger staff member, maybe 20, hovered nearby, wringing her hands but saying nothing. Her uniform was too crisp, her nerves too visible. She looked at Arden once, and quickly looked away, ashamed. Then came the whisper that wasn't whispered. "Trash trying to touch gold." The words were said by a woman with platinum hair and a voice trained in wealth. Her heels clicked like a gavel as she moved past Arden, not sparing a glance. Still, Arden did nothing. And in that silence, some began to shift. Not many, just one or two. A man lowered his phone. A young couple stopped laughing. The receptionist behind the glass stood a little straighter, a flicker of doubt creeping in. But the worst wasn't done. Not yet. A woman in a white cape coat, eyes like knives, voice smooth as glass, turned to Arden with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Let's not pretend you belong here, dear. I've been on the Elysian guest list for 10 years. You look like someone who sells newspapers in the rain." Arden's lips parted slightly. But instead of words, only breath escaped. She simply nodded. And the stillness of that moment, her refusal to beg, to flinch, to explain, was the first crack in the wall. The crowd didn't notice it yet, but the ones with eyes did. The marble silence shattered with the sudden click of a voice, clear, amplified, and unmistakably official. "Everyone, please step back from Miss Wexley." Heads turned. A man in an obsidian suit descended from the upper terrace of the Founders' Hall, his shoes silent on the stone. His ID badge glinted under the cloud-filtered sun, Administrative Director, Elysian Wilds. The man's expression was pale, his hands trembling just slightly as he approached. "Miss Wexley, I deeply apologize. There's been a complete error in protocol." Arden looked at him, calm. "You knew I was arriving?" "Yes, of course," he breathed. "Your letter was flagged by accident. A new hire failed to register your arrival on the executive ledger." The crowd stiffened. Someone whispered, "Wait, what?" The man cleared his throat and turned toward the gawking guests. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, forcing professionalism over his fear, "may I introduce the sole majority shareholder of Elysian Holdings and the current chair of the International Conservation Fund that governs this facility." The silence was immediate. The wind itself seemed to pull back. "She what?" said the woman in the capecoat, her voice shriveling. "I assure you," the administrator continued, "this is not a misunderstanding of resemblance. This is Arden Wexley, first ranked on Forbes' Sovereign Equity Index and lead benefactor for the 2041 UN Biodiversity Accord." Phones that had once snapped her shoes now froze midair. A man slowly lowered his camera. "She owns Elysian?" he whispered. "She owns the parent company that owns the holding group that controls this zoo," the administrator said. "In fact, she funds over 70% of its budget. Every enclosure you've visited, every species you've posted about, it exists because of her." The guests turned as if choreographed. The teen who had been filming earlier was now sweating, his phone dropping to his side like a dead weight. The woman in Dior sunglasses choked. That can't be. That's not real." The receptionist behind the glass had vanished. From the top of the hill, a sleek car had arrived quietly, black, minimalist, with plates known only to diplomats and trillionaires. A man in a charcoal gray suit exited, whispered something into his earpiece, and waited. Another staff member arrived, clutching a printed dossier. "Confirmation came through international board channels," she said breathlessly. "Not just a guest. She's the owner of the land this zoo sits on. The deed's in her trust." The woman in the capecoat stumbled a step backward. Arden met her gaze. And for the first time all morning, she spoke, softly, but not kindly. "You may not remember my name," she said, "but every paycheck, every animal fed here, every coat you wore through my gate, remembers mine." The courtyard that had just echoed with laughter now trembled with silence. The man in the obsidian suit took a cautious step closer to Arden, but she raised a hand. "No need," she said simply. "Let's not rush the fallout." She turned to the crowd, not furious, not triumphant. Just factual. "I didn't walk in unnoticed," she began, her voice calm but echoing with authority. "I was watched. Filmed. Mocked. Dismissed. Repeatedly." The zookeeper beside her nodded, lips pursed tight with regret. The administrative director's tablet pinged. He scanned the alert, then looked up, color draining from his face. "Miss Wexley," he said softly, "the surveillance review team has already flagged 32 individuals for direct violations of Elysian's guest conduct code." "Read the names," Arden said. His voice cracked, but he obeyed. "Graham Whitford. Elise Tran. Margot Bellamy. Kira Looney. Preston St. No," someone whispered. "Samuel Klein. Olivia Reeds. Jeremy Flume." Each name landed like a gavel. Some tried to hide behind sunglasses. Others glanced around as if seeking a hidden exit. A few guests began to edge backward, shame blooming behind their curated facades. One woman in white heels began. "There's no way to know context." "We have audio and video," the administrator said firmly. "Several of you filmed and posted the humiliation yourselves." One clip already reached 90,000 views under the tag #ZooFreak. That alone is grounds for civil penalties. A man with a red scarf shouted. But we didn't know who she was. Arden turned to him, her voice low. Did you need to? She asked. Do you only grant dignity when it's profitable? He froze. Eyes wide. Mouth opening, then closing. She faced the administrator. Remove them. Ban their names from every Elysian property worldwide. Revoke lifetime access. Flag their companies as restricted partners. Gasps. You can't! Someone cried. That's hundreds of millions in business. Arden's expression didn't flicker. It's integrity. And that has no price. Staff moved in quietly but swiftly, taking names, escorting guests out. No shouting. No handcuffs. Just velvet gloves closing around pride and dragging it into the sunlight. Arden remained on the path, hands behind her back, watching as power shifted, not with violence, but with the clean, unmistakable sound of doors closing behind the unworthy. The last of the escorted guests had vanished down the marble walk. Their designer coats flapped behind them like defeated flags. Only a few onlookers remained now, silent, shaken, no longer sure whether to flee or apologize. Arden stood in the same spot. Her sweater still sagged at the seams. Her sneakers bore the same stains. But the ground beneath her felt different. Heavier. Steadier. She turned to the few who remained, not the ones who'd mocked her, but the ones who hadn't spoken at all. A young woman who had stood near the butterfly dome, hands clenched. An older groundskeeper, who had silently offered her a nod when no one else would meet her eyes. And the teenage boy with the phone, still frozen, his device hanging at his side now, no longer filming. Arden looked directly at him. Her voice was soft, almost too soft for the wind. Were you going to tag me? She asked. Or were you just hoping I'd cry? He swallowed hard, guilt thick in his throat. I didn't know who you were. Arden nodded. That's the point. She stepped forward, her gaze sweeping the emptying walkways, her words sharp and measured, not loud, but unwavering. I didn't come here to be recognized. I didn't come here to be celebrated. I came to watch. The administrator stiffened beside her. So did the remaining staff. The implications hung like storm clouds. I wanted to see, she continued, how my guests behave when they believe the eyes watching them don't matter. I wanted to know whether power means anything to them if it's not wearing designer shoes. She let the words hang. I learned a lot. Silence. Then she smiled, not cruelly, but with a calm sadness that cut deeper than fury ever could. I don't need to punish anyone more than they already punished themselves. What you've lost today wasn't access. It was grace. It was the benefit of the doubt. The gift of being seen as decent, even in the absence of proof. She paused, her eyes drifting to the dome again. But I didn't come to take anything. I came to understand. Arden stepped back. And now I do. No applause followed. No rush of redemption. Just the echo of her truth, a stillness louder than judgment, sharper than wealth. The grand gates of Elysian wilds began to close, not in warning, but in quiet punctuation. The guests were gone. Their perfume lingered in the air like ghosts. Arden didn't move. She stood at the curve of the path where gravel met glass and simply breathed. She looked down at her shoes. The dirt hadn't been swept from them. No one had polished her dignity for the cameras. And yet, everything around her had shifted. The administrator beside her stepped forward, then hesitated. Miss Wexley. Arden, would you like to move to the founder's suite? She turned her head slowly. No. I'd like to walk the paths the way they were meant to be walked. No golf cart. No entourage. He nodded, not fully understanding, but too humbled to question. As she passed the last security post, the guard who had turned her away earlier stood stiffly, shame pressed deep into his spine. His hands twitched near his cap. I didn't know, he said quietly. I know, Arden replied. That's why it mattered. He opened his mouth again, but the apology collapsed before it formed. She didn't wait for it. She didn't need it. Further down, A woman in a green maintenance jacket waited by the lemur exhibit, the one who hadn't laughed, hadn't recorded, hadn't flinched. Her face was lined, weathered by wind and sun, her gaze steady. "I saw how they looked at you," she said as Arden approached. "Figured it wasn't right. But I didn't know what to say." "You said enough," Arden replied, offering the woman the warmest smile she'd given all day. "You didn't add to the noise. That was more than most." The woman nodded once and gently handed Arden a thermos of mint tea. "Hot," she said. "They might have frozen you, but this'll thaw you back." They shared a moment, not elevated, not ceremonial, but real. And when Arden turned to walk deeper into the sanctuary, only 3 people followed at a respectful distance: the maintenance worker, the young woman with the clenched hands, and the groundskeeper who had nodded earlier. No entourage. No press. Just truth. Just those who had said nothing cruel, and now stood beside her without expectation. The wind had softened. The sun peeked past the trees. The zoo, for the first time all morning, felt quiet in the right way. Not silenced. Stilled. As Arden walked past the snow leopard's ridge, their coats blending with the pale stone behind them, her thoughts drifted, not to the cruelty, not to the banishment, but to the long, unglamorous road that had brought her here. The scent of pine, the sound of gravel, the cold curve of the thermos in her hand, they took her back to the Appalachian winters. Not the elegant kind. The kind where a borrowed coat had to last 3 years and boiled pasta meant it was payday. She hadn't grown up in marble. She'd grown up in silence, the kind of silence that comes from missing things: power, heat, certainty. Her mother folded napkins in hotel banquet halls. Her father laid rebar until the tendons in his arms hardened like cables. And Arden, she read. She read anything, everything, especially about the animals no one ever asked to be beautiful. At 15, she lied about her age and worked at a roadside sanctuary, a place with more cages than funds. She swept up bad droppings for minimum wage and stayed late to memorize the veterinary manuals when no one was watching. She was always unnoticed. But she was always watching. She never forgot the day a man in a brown coat visited with a tablet and a smile full of money. She'd corrected him, gently, when he misnamed a species. He'd offered her a job on the spot. That job turned into a scholarship. Then a grant. Then a fellowship. Then silence again, until the boardrooms came calling. By 29, she'd negotiated the sale of 2 biotech patents. By 30, she'd built a private conservation trust. By 31, she had begun acquiring controlling interests in sanctuaries and endangered species breeding programs across 3 continents. Always quietly. Always from the margins. Not because she was shy. But because power spoke loudest when you let others show their teeth first. She paused now beside the koi pond near the center of Elysian Wilds, a feature she had anonymously donated the year the zoo opened. A mother pointed at the koi, whispering softly to her child. Neither had laughed earlier. Arden noticed. She pulled a wrapped candy from her coat pocket, the same brand her mother had kept in her apron. Peppermint. She unwrapped it slowly, placed it on her tongue, and stared at the water. They'd never known her. Not when she walked in. But every brick of this place had been stacked with her name hidden beneath the mortar. She didn't need them to remember. She only needed them to never forget what silence could build. By the time Arden returned to the central pavilion, the sun had shifted, casting long golden bars across the cobblestones like prison bars turned light. The air, once thick with gossip and perfume, now carried the faint scent of eucalyptus and newly raked soil. She stepped through the arched doors. Inside, the board had gathered. Not for her, they hadn't known she was coming. But now, every chair straightened. Every whisper ceased. A glass wall behind her framed the lemur canopy. The zoo's heartbeat, pulsing in leaves and animal breath, made the silence inside feel shamefully sterile. The director of global operations stood. "Miss Wexley." "No," Arden said gently. "You may call me Chair Wexley. As of 37 minutes ago, I have assumed direct governance of this institution, following violations of its founding charter." Gasps. A man in a plum tie stood too fast. "You're invoking the audit clause?" Arden nodded. Yes. A full integrity review. All personnel who stood silent while harassment occurred, suspended pending evaluation. Any who participated, terminated. A screen flickered to life behind her. Surveillance footage. Muted. Clip after clip, smirks, sneers, pointed fingers, phones held up with glee. The woman in the white capecoat laughing. The teen whispering. Goodwill edition. Staff looking on, saying nothing. She didn't narrate. She let the silence do its own wounding. Then, without raising her voice, she said, This is no longer a zoo. It is a reflection of the people trusted to steward life. And today, that reflection cracked. Her tablet buzzed. A staff member approached with an envelope. International press requests have begun flooding in. He murmured. They know. Arden nodded. Then let them see. She turned back to the board. Effective immediately, I am reallocating 10% of executive bonuses to fund educational access grants, for youth without pedigree but with passion. The gate policy is abolished. Elysian will no longer measure worth in fabric or wallet weight. One woman at the table began to cry. Another whispered, We should have known. Arden looked at her. No. You chose not to. Outside, a drone hovered. Arden stepped past the glass, faced the lens, and let it capture her exactly as she was, worn coat, scuffed sneakers, peppermint candy still dissolving behind her teeth. Let the world see, she whispered. And it did. The next morning, the story had bloomed like wildfire. Not through tabloids. Through truth. Clips of Arden Wexley standing in worn sneakers went viral, not because they were embarrassing, but because they were devastating. Every voice that had mocked her became a time-stamped relic. Every jeer, a confession broadcast to millions. The caption beneath her photo. The woman they laughed at owns the land under their feet. By noon, luxury sponsors had dropped statements. Not apologies, denials. They scrubbed their involvement, quietly hoping Arden's name wouldn't appear on their quarterly board audits. But it did. By dusk, 12 corporate ambassadors had been removed. 4 private memberships revoked. The Dior Sunglassed Women's Art Trust collapsed. The teen's influencer contract was terminated. Elysian Wild's website quietly updated. A single paragraph now led the home page. We no longer screen by appearance. We screen by presence. Compassion is our only dress code. That evening, Arden walked the zoo grounds alone. She paused near the bird conservatory, a donation made in her father's name. He'd never seen the inside of a zoo. Too many hours, too many shifts. She placed a small plaque beside the entrance, one no one had seen her install. For the ones who gave everything, but were never invited inside. At the front gate, the same young security guard from the day before stood straighter when he saw her. He didn't salute. He didn't grovel. He simply opened the gate. No name needed, he said quietly. Arden nodded. Keep it open. Always. As she stepped past the threshold, the wind brushed her braid across her shoulder, as if nature itself remembered her walk from yesterday, but now moved with her. She didn't look back. She didn't need a spotlight. The power was never in revealing who she was. It was in showing them who they'd become when they thought no one important was watching. Arden Wexley disappeared down the street like anyone else, coats swaying, sneakers soft on stone, but the world behind her had changed. The next time a woman in plain clothes approached a closed gate, they hesitated before judging. And sometimes that was enough.